Syracuse football could be returning more offensive linemen than previously thought.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, the Diego Pavia ruling, the quarterback from Vanderbilt who sued the NCAA for an extra year of eligibility due to playing in JUCO, well, that ruling has a massive impact potentially on Syracuse football's offensive line for next season. And that's what we're going to talk about here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. John Ray Reed, the starting center, announced on Twitter right after the bowl game, he announced it himself, that he is returning to college. And we'll go over that first. Also, later on in the show, we're going to talk about Syracuse's starting guards from this past season and how they might be able to return, Jakob Bradford, and Mark Petry. And then I'm going to go over some scenarios of the offensive line and how the Orange can maneuver the offseason based on the current rulings and who or who does not come back to Syracuse. Okay, let's start off the podcast talking about John Ray Reed. The Diego Pavia ruling has a huge impact on Syracuse football, and I talked about it on a previous episode with Kyle McCord and how it could impact Kyle McCord's case for an extra year of eligibility, but it really has more of an impact directly to Syracuse's offensive line. For those that don't know, Diego Pavia, the Vanderbilt starting quarterback this past season, he sued the NCAA for an extra year of eligibility because he played in JUCO, which deprived him of NIL. Pavia won the case, and as a result, the NCAA just granted basically everyone who started their career in JUCO who were out of eligibility at the end of this season an extra year. And that relates directly to Syracuse because John Ray Reed, their starting center, he started his career in JUCO, and he was out of eligibility. But now he can come back, and he announced on Twitter that he is coming back. He said, quote, "I will be using my extra year granted to JUCO players." The interesting part about his statement is that he did not say he was returning to Syracuse. He said that he was going to use his extra year to return to college. It should be noted that no player on the Orange anymore can enter the portal as of right now. The portal closed just a few days ago, but there is a spring portal window that opens on April 16th and lasts until April 25th. So I'm not saying that John Ray Reed is going to transfer out. I just kind of find the wording interesting because he only said that he is going back to college, not necessarily back to Syracuse. But regardless, this is absolutely massive for the Syracuse football program. And for the purposes of this podcast, let's assume that John Ray Reed will be back with Syracuse next season as the starting center. The reason why right now I'm leaning towards he will be is because it makes too much sense. John Ray Reed has started 25 of 26 games at center for Syracuse the past 2 years. He was better in 2023, where he was Syracuse's highest rated offensive lineman with a minimum of 300 snaps played, according to Pro Football Focus. And Reed was only responsible for 1 sack given up in 2023. In 2024, John Ray Reed was Syracuse's 4th rated offensive lineman, which is not exactly great, 4th out of 5. And he was the 14th rated center in the ACC, which is not exactly good. Okay, 14th in the ACC. There's only 17 teams in basketball, in football, I should say, in football. So 14 out of 17 isn't great. However, having continuity on the offensive line is huge because you think about the offensive line as a unit, they talk. They have to talk before every single play. Center is very important because he's also the eyes and ears of the quarterback. calling out the shots to the offensive line and the certain protections. So you want to have continuity for chemistry purposes. And if you're Syracuse, the way you attack center in the portal going forward is this. If you can find someone that is significantly better than John Ray Reed, then by all means, go out and get that player. But if it's like a marginal difference between John Ray Reed and another center potentially in the portal this offseason, or someone that you can promote from within, you might as well stay with John Ray Reed for that continuity, especially also if you get Kyle McCord back. You want to have the same center for Kyle McCord if possible, if he were to be back. So overall, John Ray Reed, he can come back. He is coming back to college. We just don't know if he is coming to Syracuse. And it makes all the sense in the world for him to come back to Syracuse because he's been a starter the past 2 seasons. And also the fact that the Orange need a center. If he does not come back, the Orange are going to have to get a center in the portal, or they can move positions with someone on the offensive line, or they can try to promote from within. But even their backup center, Josh Iloa, is out of eligibility. And he's not going to get that Diego Pavia ruling. I believe he's stayed with Syracuse his entire career. So it makes all the sense in the world for John Ray Reed to return to Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse. And let me know your thoughts on Syracuse's offensive line this upcoming season and your thoughts on John Ray Reed potentially coming back to Syracuse. Again, I want to reiterate one more time. John Ray Reed can and will be back in college football next season. He announced it himself on Twitter. This is not speculation. But he did not say he was coming back to Syracuse per se. However, it makes all the sense in the world considering he has been a starting center the last 2 years, and the fact that the Orange, if they don't have John Ray Reed next season, are going to need to find a center. Okay? Cool. So, John Ray Reed going back to college. Thank you to the Diego Pavia case and the NCAA granting everyone in JUCO who was out of eligibility an extra year of college. This ruling doesn't just impact Syracuse's center, John Ray Reed. It also impacts the 2 starting guards from this past season, Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry. And that's who we're going to talk about next on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions or spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And folks, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to drop a like and hit that subscribe button. Not only is it completely free and allows the channel to show up directly on your feed, but it also helps grow the channel and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. On today's show, we are talking about how Diego Pavia's court ruling and the NCAA granting JUCO players an extra year of eligibility directly impacts Syracuse's offensive line. We just talked about how John Ray Reed, the starting center, has already announced that he is coming back to college for another year after previously not having an extra year of eligibility. But thank you to Diego Pavia and the NCAA. Now let's talk about the starting guards from this past season, because Syracuse could potentially be getting both of them back, Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry. Now, it should be noted that they started their careers in JUCO, but it was in 2019. So these guys have been in college for 6 seasons. So it's unclear whether or not this extra year of eligibility granted by the NCAA impacts Bradford and Petry, but I think it's a fair assumption to say it does, in the sense that they will get an extra year because the NCAA doesn't want to get sued again. Let's face it, okay? But John Ray Reed, for comparison, I believe he started in JUCO in 2021. So he's only been in school for 4 years. So it makes sense that he would be getting that 5th year. With Bradford and Petry, it would be 7th years because they've already been in college for 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24. That's 6 seasons right there. Okay? So if we assume that Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry are going to get that extra year of eligibility from the NCAA, then it comes down to whether or not it's with Syracuse, kind of similar to John Ray Reed saying he's going back to college, but he didn't say he was coming back to the Orange, right? But it would be massive for Bradford and Petry, and it makes all of the sense in the world once again. They are both veteran starters, and they both fill a need. When this offseason began, I told you guys, aside from quarterback, okay, quarterback was the free space is the biggest need of the offseason. But aside from quarterback, it was the offensive line, because 4 of Syracuse's 5 starters from this past year were out of eligibility. Now it appears that only one of them is out of eligibility, and that's Savion Washington, who I think will be an NFL player for what it's worth. I think he was a very, very good player for Syracuse this past season. But offensive line was a massive, massive need, and they did kind of address it in the portal. They made one addition. They got that Bama tackle, Naquil Beatrand. But other than that, this offensive line was just filled with holes. And then this Diego Pavia ruling comes out. You're telling me that now we can get back Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry? I would love that. You're going to have your starting guards from this past season potentially. It's huge. And for what it's worth, the offensive line this past year, it was actually pretty good. I got numbers to back it up for you. You want to hear them? Leave a comment in the comment section below, because here we go, all right? Syracuse football was upper half in the country in sacks allowed per game. Now, upper half doesn't sound like it's amazing, right? It's upper half out of about 130 FBS teams. That's not great. But keep in mind, Syracuse football threw more than any other team in the entire country. So the fact that they were still upper half is actually a real positive on the offensive line. And to further my point on that, Syracuse football gave up a sack about 4% per dropback. Okay, that means when Kyle McCord steps back to pass, he gets sacked 4% of the time. That was top 30 in the country. So they kept Kyle McCord clean for the most part this season. With the exception of the Stanford game, they weren't that great in. Boston College, they weren't that great in. But aside from those games, and Pitt was a disaster, really in their losses. That was it. But in their wins, they were great. The offensive line was more than capable of holding up this season. Where they were kind of weak in was the run blocking, where Syracuse as a team averaged just 3.2 yards per carry. But keep in mind, Syracuse football did not exactly have a mobile quarterback this season in Kyle McCord. Love Kyle McCord to death. And if he's back next season, great. And if not, he's going to be a productive NFL player. But I think we can all agree his strong suit is not exactly his mobility. So you're not getting that added bonus of your quarterback being able to run and pick up that yards per carry. Plus, when you get sacked in college, it counts as negative rushing yards, which is just a weird stack work. So the 3.2 yards per carry is a little bit misleading. That's where I would direct you to LeQuint Allen, who averaged 4.5 yards per carry, which was 18th in the ACC out of about 25, 26 players who qualified for the statistic. But again, keep in mind, there's no mobile quarterback. So it also impacts LeQuint Allen's yards per carry, because when Kyle McCord is going to give the ball to LeQuint, right, when he's giving a handoff, there's no real threat of him keeping the ball, with the exception of that one play against Boston College. He had one where it was called back. It was like a 60-yard run. And he had another play that held firm for about a 30-yard run. But aside from those plays against Boston College, When Kyle McCord was handing the ball off to LeQuint Allen, it was either going to be a handoff or play action. There was no threat of really Kyle McCord keeping the ball, which is very important because it allows the edge rusher on the outside contained to just barrel in towards LeQuint or the running back. When you have a dual threat quarterback, the edge rusher kind of has to sit and respect the quarterback's mobility, which impacts a running back's yards per carry. So it's a little bit misleading on both ends. And so overall, I would say that this offensive line this past season was actually a net positive, right? Only a sack 4% of the time, which was top 30 in the country. Their yards per carry and run blocking, I don't think it was as good as their pass blocking, but they were still, in my opinion, above average. The numbers don't do it justice there. So if you can get continuity back, if John Ray Reed can return, that would be amazing. And then we're talking about the guards here, Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry. It's unclear whether or not the Pavia ruling is going to impact them because they've been in college for so long. But assuming it does, and the NCAA doesn't want to get sued again, we could be looking at having Syracuse's interior offensive line from this past season completely loaded for this upcoming season. It's the same unit. That would be absolutely outstanding. So coming up, I'm going to give you guys some scenarios for the offensive line this upcoming season and how the Orange can navigate, let's say, everyone coming back and let's say nobody coming back. That's coming up next here on Locked On Syracuse. The most ideal scenario for Syracuse football and their offensive line for next season is that everyone returns that can possibly return. And that means John Ray Reed, Jakob Bradford, and Mark Petry. So in this scenario, Syracuse football does not have to address offensive line anymore. They are done. And that's a good thing because this offensive line was pretty good this past season. It gives Syracuse not only a pretty good offensive line, but it gives them continuity with their two guards and their center. Your left tackle is going to be one of probably David Woolaba or Demetrius Weatherspoon. I'm leaning towards Woolaba because I think he's better than Weatherspoon. And your right tackle, instead of Savion Washington, will likely be Niquil Betrand from Alabama, who they got in the portal. So it's essentially the same offensive line they just had. But instead of Savion Washington, you have Niquil Betrand. And I think overall, we can expect similar results because it's a similar offensive line from this year. Now, let's say John Ray Reed returns, but for whatever reason, the guards don't, whether it's due to not actually gaining an extra year of eligibility or the fact that they just simply don't want to return to Syracuse. They decide to enter the portal in the spring and they go elsewhere because it could happen, right? In this scenario, obviously, you still have your starting center in John Ray Reed, but you would need to figure out the guards in the portal. Perhaps there's a redshirt freshman or two that can step up and fill those guard positions. But my bet is that one of the tackles would slide in to play guard. One of those three tackles are David Woolaba, Demetrius Weatherspoon, and Niquil Betrand, who they just got from Alabama. I think if both guards leave, one of them is going to slide to guard. Even if one of them, let's say, return, you still have that other guard that's open. And I think one of those three tackles is going to be playing guard next season for Syracuse football. Now, let's say both guards do return. Okay, so Mark Petry and Jakob Bradford, but John Ray Reed, who announced that he's coming back to college but didn't say Syracuse, decides to enter the portal in the spring and go elsewhere. Well, then Syracuse is in a little bit of a pickle because you would need a starting center, and it's not as easy as, well, let's just promote whoever the backup was this past year because the backup, Josh Ailoa, is out of eligibility. So you're probably going portaling if you're Syracuse football. You are looking for a center. I'm not sure if there's anyone in-house that they would be comfortable with being the starting center come August 30th against Tennessee, because that's the season opener. So likely they're going into the portal to find a center if John Ray Reed goes elsewhere. But like I said at the top, even though John Ray Reed wasn't the best center in 2024, for continuity purposes, for chemistry on the offensive line, especially if Kyle McCord and or the guards can come back, you want to have a similar unit to the unit you just had because it was a strong unit. And chemistry definitely matters on the offensive line. So hopefully John Ray Reed stays, but if not, they're probably going to go in the portal to address it because even the backup is out of eligibility. And then there is the uh-oh scenario. What's the uh-oh scenario, you ask? Well, what if nobody returns? What if John Ray Reed decides to enter the portal? What if Jakob Bradford and Mark Petry either enter the portal in the spring or they don't get that extra year of eligibility from the NCAA? Because again, it's not clear because they've been in college for already 6 years. So let's say nobody returns. Well, then you're back to square one with the offensive line in the sense that it's the biggest need besides quarterback this offseason. And since they got Ricky Collins, which is their backup plan in case that the Kyle McCord ruling doesn't go in their favor, the offensive line becomes the number one need for the Orange. Period, point blank. I think what would happen is my scenario of moving a tackle to guard will come into effect. It's those three of Willaba, Weatherspoon, or Beatrand. The other starting guard is anyone's guess. Joe Cruz was a backup this season. He's got an extra year of eligibility. There's also Josh Miller, who entered the transfer portal from Syracuse as a backup this past season, but decided to take himself out of the portal, so maybe he gets promoted. The center position is what I said in the last minute or so. You probably are going in the portal to address center if John Ray Reed is gone. This would be the least ideal scenario because the Orange would have to replace 4 of their 5 starters on the offensive line, which was a pretty good unit from this past season. The most ideal scenario is that John Ray Reed, Jakob Bradford, and Mark Petry are all back. So Syracuse's interior offensive line is the same. Their left tackle is David Willaba or Demetrius Weatherspoon, and your right tackle is likely Naquil Beatrand. So those are the scenarios for the offensive line. What are your thoughts on Syracuse's offensive line outlook for next season? Leave a comment in the comment section below. I would love to hear your thoughts on the offensive line and whether or not you're concerned about it. To me, it comes down to who's coming back and who's leaving. If they all come back, not concerned one bit. If they don't come back, then I am concerned. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, tomorrow there will be a podcast about LeQuint Allen. That's right, because after the bowl game, he said in an interview that he is going to talk with Coach Fran Brown on Tuesday to decide his future. So tomorrow is Monday. We are going to talk about LeQuint Allen and his upcoming decision. He's got 3 choices. He can come back to Syracuse. He can declare early for the NFL draft, or he can wait and enter the transfer portal in the spring. So that's what's coming up tomorrow on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. And then on Tuesday, we got a basketball post-game reaction podcast because the Orange are taking on Wake Forest at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. And so I will be here after the game to break it all down for you guys in a post-game reaction podcast. ACC play from here on out. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And folks, I imagine over the next few days and next few weeks, there is going to be a lot of news regarding Syracuse football. Who's staying? Who's leaving? Does Kyle McCord get that extra year or not? Even if he gets the extra year, is he going to stay? What's going on with LeQuint Allen? Is he going to come back to Syracuse? Well, that's why you want to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications so you know exactly when I am dropping the next podcast. You can also follow us on social media at LO_Syracuse on Twitter. So that's where I announce a lot of when I'm going to be dropping podcasts and everything like that. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. And everyone, take care.